It's not about giving, but it's about enabling lives. So sometimes I like to say we're in the business of enabling lives.
Yes, that's true. How much wealth is enough? How much prosperity is enough?
I think beyond a certain level, it's bragging rights.
That you can't slot empowerment. For somebody, it's education. For somebody, it's financial. For somebody, it's just having agency and that voice in the house.
Yes, and you have to keep the field open for
Yes.
But even if you change the life of one person, and certainly you can, one has the ability to do more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, you make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had to describe what giving has done for you in one word, what would it look like?
Sense of satisfaction.
It keeps me grounded and gives me a sense of purpose.
If you take a shortcut to success, it can be exhilarating, but you sooner rather than later you're bound to trip on something.
Hello, I am Naghma Mulla and welcome to a new episode of Give It a Go. Today I'm joined by Shaifalika and Subhrakant Panda, two people who are deeply involved in transforming communities through education, healthcare, and livelihood initiatives. Shaifalika stays closely involved and brings a grounded, people-first approach that focuses on what actually makes a difference over time. Subhrakant is widely known for building large businesses, and alongside that, he has been deeply involved in supporting education, healthcare, and community development across underserved regions. This conversation is about how thoughtful giving takes shape, what it means to stay invested over time, and how impact is built in ways that truly endure. Very, very warm welcome to both of you, Shaifalika, Subhrakant. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. And I want to get down right to it with you first, Subhrakant, because I was also reading about the rich legacy that your parents have kind of enabled the Dr. Bansidhar, Mrs. Ila Panda, the way they thought about welfare, the way they thought about business prosperity and community well-being. As a holder of that kind of legacy, how does that impact the way you look at wealth as a source of sharing with community, as a source of, giving back to society? How does that impact you as a business person?
So it's a legacy that I am very proud of. As you would know, my father was a research scientist in the US and worked on assignment with the British government before deciding to come back and set up IMFA in the early 60s. And the idea was to contribute to Odisha's industrialization, because it's a state which is very rich in mineral resources, but not much value addition took place. And he picked a remote corner of Odisha in erstwhile Koraput district to set up the company in 1961. And both my parents, right from the beginning, thought that it is important to integrate with the local communities. So, whatever facilities we have for our employees, whether it is basic healthcare, education, community facilities, are all open to the local community. And I think their vision was that it's important to be in harmony with the local community, to integrate them into the business, so that and of course the idea was not just to set up a company which looks at the commercial side of things. Of course, that's important, but to contribute back to the state. So that's something that has been ingrained in me right from childhood. And as I said, it's a legacy that is very is something that I take a lot of pride in, and look to build on that.
Yeah, in a way, it's the biggest gift parents can give to their kids, right? This kind of goodness that comes, especially when you are in positions of power and positions of wealth. And so, what was this journey like for you? Because, in the course of life, you realize that there must be accountability beyond shareholdership and beyond business, and it has to be shared with communities. What did that journey look like for you?
Naghma, I grew up in a house where both my parents worked. So from a young age, what was very clear was that I would work. It was a subconscious thing. But what I also saw was a huge sense of responsibility and empathy that they ingrained in us. And when I married Subhrakant, I saw a lot more of that, with actually being visiting the villages, engaging with people, because my mother-in-law was not so much as someone who was coming in as a philanthropist, but she was ma to them. So till date, like, she passed away more than 25 years ago, and that's still the thing. Ma aate the, ma ye kehte the. So, we've learned from that. And when I took a conscious decision to, make this passion a profession, um, I figured I have a great canvas in Odisha, and that's where I should sort of utilize my time and try to make a difference.
In these and in some very important occasions, we realize, and you may definitely have realized, that your position and your influence holds power, and people are listening to you because of it. And that is an immense responsibility to be holding. How do you navigate that?
So, you're absolutely right. But I think that that comes from the fact that we have a track record of 6 decades of contributing to the state's growth, of contributing to industrialization, of contributing to employment, and we have tried to go about it the right way. Never taken the a short road to success. Always focused on the longer term, always focused on something beyond business. And I'd like to emphasize, that there's nothing wrong in focusing on business. I mean, of course, the core has to be successful, profitable,
Absolutely.
for us to be able to do anything beyond that. But that doesn't mean that that is the priority. We're focused, as I said, on greater good, on engaging with communities, on giving back to society.
Yes.
And the fact that we have a track record of more than 6 decades means that we have the privilege, in a manner, of having access to the right ears to convey, give feedback, to convey what can be done better. And I think, and we've tried to do that responsibly.
The reason why I'm also, kind of going deeper into this part of the conversation is that in many places, because we come with, with access to so many things, we also tend to believe, and I mean a large number of us, that we know better, that, we know what can solve a problem somewhere, and we know that all we need to do is fix 1, 2, and 3, and lives will become better and more enabled. But and that's why your approach is so
The truth is far from that. We know
yes,
that.
yes. So how you as individuals, like while the legacy came and you did see your parents and your mother-in-law do it, for you as individual humans, were there moments of epiphany? Were there moments when you realized, no, this cannot be us telling them, this has to be with them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, we have the legacy going back from the 60s. So things were very different then. And over the years, and especially when I came into the space, which was just a little before 2010, um, one studies the landscape and one realizes that it's not about talking to them, it's talking with them, it's walking with them. Um, and we made it a point to sort of introspect at that moment and make a shift. We've always engaged with communities, but now in the last 16, 17 years, it's truly been a community led engagement where they co create with us their solutions, because problems are similar across geographies. It's the solutions. There's no one size fits all solution. So it's the solutions that we make sure we co create with them. We make them participants in that journey and we make them take ownership of that change. And that is the big difference that we have worked towards in the last 15, 16 years, to make sure that everything we do has a sustainable outcome. It's not about giving, but it's about enabling lives. So sometimes I like to say we're in the business of enabling lives.
Yeah, that's true. And for you, has it happened that there's been a moment where you said, where things kind of fall into perspective all over again?
Absolutely. A little older and wiser now, but early on, you think that you have solutions to everything, and it can be done fairly easily. But there are challenges. The question is to find a way around them. And like you said, I mean, there are moments of epiphany where you realize that. I mean, it's not so easy to bring about that change, but it's not something that you can give up on either. I mean, you have to keep working at it, and over the course of time, you do manage to make that shift.
Yeah, and you do realize that these are smart people in bad situations and not
No, I think the other thing that has also changed is a lot of us now know that we have to be in this for the long term. And when I say that, a lot of us have been working in the space for the long term, but it's about the intervention. That has to be a long term commitment which continues in a very systemic way. Because if you have to bring in systemic change, you have to work in a very organized fashion. A lot of us are working, um, in our own areas of passion, but a lot of us are working in silos.
Yes.
We are not going to be able to make a dent if we work in silos. What we really, really need to do is we need to collaborate and we need to work together. That's when I think we'll be able to bring about a change. We're going to stop the duplication that we all do when we work in isolation. And we're going to sort of create that ripple effect and an ecosystem which will then allow our beneficiaries to take care of their own lives and truly be self-reliant.
In the space that you're sitting in the, you have access to privilege and access to this this absolutely disastrous, sad situation. Some things can be fixed and some things will not be fixed. But it is a very uncomfortable position to, it's like playing in two worlds. How do you navigate that?
It's an interesting question. I'll give you a story about a time I was visiting some villages in the south of Odisha in Raigada district where we work. And just like every time you go on your field visits, you have a certain segment, I'll visit these 3 or 4 places. And there was this group of people who stopped my car and they said, Nahi, aap hamare yahan aiye. And they were not on the plan, they were pretty far. And we were like, this is not going to happen. And we reached the next village, which was on the schedule, and they had walked. About 30 of them had walked and reached there by the time I finished my meeting in that village. And I felt really bad. So I said, okay, we'll come. Imagine we drive to their village, the village is empty. Because they had all walked to invite me.
Oh no.
So we went there, and there were just women and children waiting there. And we then waited for the rest of, there were about 30 men from that. It was a very small hamlet. And we waited for them, and then, they talked to us. And the beauty was they greeted us and they welcomed us with warmth. And they never asked for anything. There was just this belief in us. If you come, you will see for yourself. And when you do that, I can tell you it really grounds you. You think you've seen a few disparities and then you see something which you've never seen before. So when you come back to your life here, you make sure and say, this is great, but I need to put this to use. I need to sort of help as many as I can in the best possible manner that I can. So
If you allow it to, it can be a very grounding experience.
It's a very powerful motivator.
Yeah, it's a very powerful motivator. And when you operate amongst sharks in your day job, right? I mean, it's business, it's profitability, it's becoming number one, share price, all of that is going on. And because that's like the inherent first response all the time, when does it all like there, and then of course this other world operates, does it any, how do you navigate this? Is this enough, kind of a question, how much wealth is enough, how much prosperity is enough? Because these are two, I mean, it's difficult to be operating at full capacity and then also sitting with these very, very real questions all at once.
So, I look at that in a slightly different manner. From a business perspective, I think it is important, it is imperative to keep on growing, because if you don't, you stagnate, and and if you stagnate, then it's downhill thereafter. So I think from a business perspective, it is important to keep on pushing for growth. It is important to keep on pushing to excel, to do better than you did a month earlier, a quarter earlier, a year earlier. So that's one thing. I think that's something which is sort of relentless, and you owe it to all the stakeholders. Absolutely. Because it's not just about the founder, it's not just about the promoter. There are very many other stakeholders.
There are thousands.
But if you look at it from a wealth point of view, I think beyond a certain level, it's bragging rights. For a comfortable living, I mean, very early on, you can get to that stage. And that's where I think the thought process which has been inculcated in us right from the beginning by my parents, which is to say that the business, I mean, you can be, I wouldn't say cutthroat, but I think you need to be sharp, you need to be focused, you need to be clear about what your targets are. but equally, leverage that to give back to society, leverage that to improve people's lives. You can't make a difference to everybody. You can't solve every problem that there is there. But even if you change the life of one person, and certainly you can, one has the ability to do more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, you make a difference.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is so important. So I'm going to ask you a very sharp question on this. Like in moments where key decisions have to be taken, what are some of your rules that are non-negotiable for you? To be a responsible business person as well as a responsible human or citizen. Is there even that? Because a lot of people do have, these. I mean, this is something that I will not do. Or
So
should you largely be
I don't think the two are mutually sort of exclusive, right? As I said, from a business perspective, to grow, to be aggressive, to want to be the best at whatever you're doing, I think is important. To have that ambition and to keep working at it. But as I mentioned at the beginning, do
It's
things
not
the
going to
right
come
way.
at the cost of the community, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Not at the cost of the community, not at the cost of the environment. So do things the right way. And I think something that I'm very proud of, what my parents believed in and what I have, tried to take forward, is to look at the long term, not look at short term successes, not look at shortcuts to, to get something done, but to do things for the, keeping the longer term in mind, keeping the greater good in mind. I mean, at some level, it sounds very idealistic, but I think it has payback for the business as well. Because if you take a shortcut to success, it can be exhilarating, but you sooner rather than later you're bound to trip on something.
No, I agree. In fact, I should tell you, I know more about your parents than you both because I've been reading so much about them. So I really appreciated it, and that's why so many questions on how does one take this forward in a world that has become even more chaotic and even more complex.
But I also believe, Naghma, that if you have certain managerial skills, they really help in the social impact space. Um, I learned the hard way in the early years, and this is prior to my actually working in Odisha when I was doing small kind of charity work and indulging in a little bit of giving back in the very young years. That if you actually think that you're doing charity and that's good, it's not necessarily going to have the outcome you want. Everything needs to have a process, it needs to be managed, it needs to be monitored to get the outcome that you are visualizing.
Yeah.
And that is something that has held me in really good stead when we work in the foundation to make sure that, look, I know that my outlook is to give back, my outlook is to enable people, my outlook is for sustainable development. But that does not mean that it's going to come with my being very benevolent and kind to the entire team. The team has their task cut out.
Yeah.
And that's when you're going to achieve this kind of impact. The other thing, like Subhrakant said, is we're in this for the long term. So we don't gauge it to say, when I say I'm going to invest in a program, every one of our programs are beyond a year. They are not for 1 year. The shortest program we have is for about 18 or 19 months because those are small literacy programs, basic literacy programs. But everything else is a 3-year intervention in the minimum. And when you do that, you're going to have to commit today to how much money you're putting out there. And then that can't be based on, a trajectory of that particular year or something else. That has
And
to
it's
be a
also a
commitment.
frustrating experience because while we like to talk about patient capital in the business of change or in the journey of change, patience is also sometimes very tough. Like after years, you realize we've been going down the wrong path completely, and by that time, years have passed. Investment of energy and emotion and wealth, of course, is past. But some lessons are only learned by doing and failing at them, and that's a hard lesson.
I couldn't agree more because, transformation is not a linear journey. There are so many external factors that come to play. I mean, like you talked in the beginning, we think we know how to give them a solution. But how are they going to react to the solution you give them? How is their lived experience going to react to the solution you give them?
Absolutely.
That is something nobody can factor in and cast in stone.
Yes.
So, which is why you need not just the flexibility and the agility, but you also need to be patient and to understand and to adapt.
Yes. I was reading about your project Unnati, and the amount of focus it has on women empowerment and all. Personally, my journey of discovering as a and I'm saying it as a woman, the shock that that there is so much similar in everyone's lives, and then there are some such strongly systemic patterns and that's why the cycle does not break. For example, in the whole piece of class and marginalization, to understand that the most marginalized man has a wife, and and that's the cycle of marginalization and depravity that we have. It changed the way I looked at my work. Are there moments like these for you where there was a big shift in how you view women empowerment?
Yes, because always when we talk about women's empowerment and we talk about, say, my project Unnati, we usually benchmark it and say, okay, this should be for a spectrum from this age group to that age group. And we chanced upon a village in Chodwar. It was cut off from the rest of the area by this forest, and it was on a hill. Again, a very small hamlet. And there was a young girl who was a teenager who expressed the desire to actually want to learn and have basic literacy and then be educated further on. um Full credit to one of my team members to identify this place, bring it to our notice, and we said, okay, let's give it a shot, but while we're at it, we can't go there for one person or just one intervention. So we made this whole process where we tied up with the Asha worker also and said, when he's going, tum moped pe baith jana और तुम भी चले जाना, health भी take हो जाएगा, DLC भी हो जाएगा. You won't believe that that cohort of people had everything from an 8-year-old to a 68-year-old woman who came in there with her little blackboard and said, मुझे भी सीखना है.
So sweet.
That was empowerment to her.
Yeah.
So that's when you realize that you can't slot empowerment. For somebody, it's education. For somebody, it's financial. For somebody, it's just having agency and that voice in the house.
Yes, and you have to keep the field open for
Yes.
that. What does patience for you look like in these kinds of conversations in this universe? Patient, like it's difficult to be patient. Like I'm very patient.
It's difficult to be patient, but I think it's not just in working with communities or giving back to communities. I think business itself requires patience because uh, as much as we look for success and instant success and continued success, growth is never a straight line, and particularly in our case, which I run a company which is in a cyclical sector, so you see ups and downs. So it teaches you to be patient. It teaches you to plan for the long term. And equally, I think that is may not be even equally, maybe more importantly relevant for working with communities and looking to bring about change. Because, like she said, it's the lived experiences that these people have. It's not for us or anybody else to go and tell them that you've been doing this wrong and you should do it that way, or you should. Nobody wants to be not doing well. It's circumstances which put them in that situation. So providing the right sort of tools and exposure and whatever else to help them overcome that situation requires patience on their part, requires patience on our part, or anybody who's working with them. So that's a great virtue to have. But yes, I mean, something which is easier said than done.
Yeah, but from the outside, the presumption, which is again one of the reasons one of the things we'd like to break, is people believe that uh, private sector, business, wealth, they are above a certain level of problems. Like they don't, there's an assumption that money has solved many problems, or position and power has solved many problems, and the marginalized are just unempowered. From your perspective, when you hold and I'm asking you as a person or as a couple that is in a position of power, the responsibility that comes with it of not just sharing but also of demonstrating through action, just like your parents did for you doing for your children or your community or your peer. There is a lot of spotlight, and so your as much as the good is spotlighted, your errors also get a lot of attention. How do you navigate that?
Well, first of all, I think what you mentioned, I think, is right, that everybody has their own set of challenges. I mean, somebody at the bottom of the pyramid has a very different challenge to someone running a large organization. And it is also true that having a certain degree of financial stability or comfort does take away some of the basic concerns. But that doesn't mean that that there are no issues or no problems or something of that sort, right? But having said that, I think the basic question you're asking, how do you translate that position? I think it's, again, you bring your lived experiences to make a difference to people's lives. You bring your position of influence and capability and whatever resources you have. And absolutely spot on when you say that important to demonstrate. For example,
Yeah, Nagma, you pointed out earlier about your position could get you a seat at certain impactful tables, most certainly. But the question is, what do you do with that seat?
Exactly.
Right? You have to represent the voice of those who are not at that table,
Yes.
the voice of those who cannot be heard. You have to advocate for what is right for society as a whole. And if we are conscious enough to do that, then I think we're playing our part
Yes.
right.
And for example, I was speaking at an event in Odisha a few months ago, and the topic was entrepreneurship, right? And again, the assumption is that because you have succeeded, that everything is sorted out,
Yes.
and everything works smoothly. And so that was my point, that every day is a new day.
Yes.
Certainly, you're in a better, much better off than somebody who's just starting on that journey. But it's I mean, there is never a point in time in business or life or whatever. You never know what curveball comes your way, and every day is a new day. But yes, you start off on a better footing than many. But and I think when you talked about, when I was mentioning about sharing experiences, I think one of the things that this country needs and is doing well now is encouraging entrepreneurship, right? But entrepreneurship is not all about success. There are more failed ventures than successful ventures. So the point I was making is that as a society, are we willing to accept failure?
The price.
Are you going to tell your children or whatever it is that go and try a venture, do it within your means, so that you're not taking a wild bet which if it goes wrong completely throws you off track. But I mean, if you are encouraging absolutely safe, guaranteed sort of outcomes, then entrepreneurial venture is not what it is. So that's where, I mean, I think you can also, beyond just social interventions or community interventions, what one has learned over 3 decades in business and manufacturing, you can share those experiences and help. And now we're talking of a greater community, not just beneficiaries, quote unquote beneficiaries, to learn from that and choose their own path.
And there's no bigger learning than failure, right? And we all see the success stories on the cover of a magazine. But for that one success story on the cover of a magazine, how many have failed? So I think it's important to talk about failures. And it's important also not to blow it out of context, but to really keep it to say, learn from this so that someone else doesn't make the same
To
mistake.
be reasonable about it as well.
Absolutely.
You don't want it, but you have to learn from it. So no, this is again very important, and thank you for saying it. And I also know that you've always been working with different stakeholders. Your desire to work with governments, with people, understanding, meeting, and that's very collaborative as an inherent nature of the work that you're doing. It's also the flip side of collaboration is again something people don't talk about, which is collaboration is the end of a lot of frustrating days, when you're trying to make something good come out of many differences of opinions, because collaboration between like-minded people is
It takes time to find the like-minded
yeah,
people.
you have to find, right, the journey of finding, the journey of that negotiation, the different goals, and how to find that share. It's a fairly frustrating experience, And also, you need to want to do it that badly, to put yourself through that experience. What has been your top learnings out of it? Like if someone else is looking at it from that level, because many people start their journey thinking I'm going to work with a government, with X, Y, Z, and in 2, 3 years the fatigue starts setting in because
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, my thought process in the initial years was not far from that. I was very, very keen to work in the health space. And I thought, great, here I am, you know, with the right intent and positioned at the right place with the communities. So, maybe if I have a few government collaborations here and I do something, this is going to take off really fast. So, you learn very early, nothing happens that fast. You learn the art of patience. It's truly an art. But you also learn how to work through the challenges. Every time you sit down and you're a part of a larger committee where you sit there, I think you should learn, you should absorb. And all stakeholders will come together when you iron out in a very transparent manner your strengths and weaknesses and where each stakeholder can fill the gap. So if you're working with government, there are a few things that the government cannot do. It's not part of their mandate. There are certain things we can't do because even if we create a really good model, it's for us to show it as a showcase to the government to scale it up.
yeah.
So yeah, it is true that it takes a lot of effort. There are challenges along the way, but I think it's worth it when you finally find that right fit.
You have to find your place in the scheme.
And I think, looking at it from a business perspective and applying that learning, collaboration is not so much about working with like-minded people as finding complementarity of skills and capabilities, and aligning it or aligning everybody in a aligning, and if required incentivizing, to get to the objectives that you have in mind. So yes, like-mindedness is important, because if you're pulling in completely different directions, that doesn't help. But it's not just about finding
It's
people
not a
who
single factor.
it's not a single factor.
You have to find that meeting ground where everyone is maybe dissatisfied enough to find that meeting ground.
That's one way of putting it.
Because
Yes.
I personally believe collaboration is all about giving up. You give up power. You give up out of the
Yes.
10 things. You're giving up some things because no, it's almost impossible.
It's
to find-
actually about accepting that there is a segment I cannot do.
Absolutely. So some part of like out of the 10 things I want, 3 things I will have to give up to meet somebody else halfway, and that's how we all kind of come to meet each other in a common ground. To
Absolutely.
figure that out, and it's so tough, and it takes real passion and a sustained rigor to want to put yourself through it again and again and again, and say no, I'm not giving up. But
Yeah.
that's yeah.
But that's with everything, right? I mean, you set yourself a goal, you set yourself a target.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't give up till you get there. And some people's journey is going to be longer and a lot more complicated, and some might just get a little lucky and it might happen faster.
Yeah. And we were also doing our research and we came across Strive, and it is very clear that the legacy goes on, and you have 2 wonderful daughters who are also doing their bit. I think who've just begun with football and sports. And how does it feel to be watching something happening like this?
Very proud. I'm delighted that that they find it in themselves to do this. But I think from a it's important to help children find their passion and use that as a peg. Because otherwise, I mean, if it is something that you're trying to force fit, even if they're trying to take forward a family legacy of giving back,
Yeah.
if it is not somehow tied to something that they are passionate about, then it becomes sort of more artificial,
Yeah.
right? With the right intent. So both of them are passionate about sports, and I think that's how it has worked out well. That became the focal point of their interventions, and working with communities here in Delhi. And but it's something that I'm very proud about, and glad that they. I mean, I think it adds to who they are as people by having these experiences. And it's not just about giving. I mean, they and you get a lot out of it in
They're
return
learning
as
a
well.
lot,
And they
right?
care, and that shows that they care for things beyond themselves.
So from a young age, we've obviously taken them with us every time we I shouldn't say every time, but often enough to see the work we do, and without a narrative, just to say observe, so they've seen that, they see the sense of responsibility, they see what um, we have decided is expected of us after our parents, and then what, I suppose they're just imbibing it. But like Subhrakant said, that sports is a passion of theirs. So we said, what are your options? And funnily enough, this came up because my older daughter was listening to a panel discussion we do on advocacy called Ideate. And it was on sports for development. And she met Abhijit Barse there and decided to have this conversation over lunch. And that's how they tied up to do this project in Delhi. And he said, I haven't managed to do this. And the beauty about it is, there's a 5-year age gap between them. So when one left for college, the question was, now do I shut this down or what do I do? And the younger one said, no, no, I love football. I'll go play with them. It came literally like that. And see how your thinking changes things. She continued, of course, because football is a huge passion. They both played at the nationals level and all. But she has a more entrepreneurial bent of mind. So she actually took parts of the Unnati project and has done an SAG and got 20 women to join the National Urban Livelihood Mission here.
That is brilliant.
So I think, and it's a learning for them to say, okay, this is what I can do. Let me utilize it in this manner.
They found it there themselves, and it has happened to them, and it's something so proud to watch. I was also interviewing Anu Aga and Meher, and they've been working in education for so long. And Anu's surprised that her granddaughter is passionate about animal welfare.
She told me
and
that,
how this
yes.
conversation changed on the dinner table conversation, the importance of animal welfare in society, and how it also had an impact on the grandparent and the parent, how it brought a different dimension to their work. It's just so beautiful when the younger people in the room kind of bring a different lens to how we do.
I don't think we can be rigid with them, right? As long as they're doing the right thing, which field or which area they want to do it in, I think we have to give them flexibility just as we have to for their career choice.
Absolutely. That's right. So if you and you're seeing the way the world is right now, the way the country is right now, and the new challenges that young people face. We work with Hurun on, even the philanthropy list. And a lot of times we see that people wait till a certain point of time to begin their journey of giving back to society. And the larger belief in many young people is that we will evolve to a certain point with 10 more years, and we will learn something, and then we will start giving. And if you had to kind of pass on a message to people who are coming into wealth, what would that be?
See, first of all, I would say that, giving is not just about money. It's about passion, it's about time, it's about commitment, it's about helping people change, outcomes or whatever it is. I think giving financially is an important part, but only a small part of the equation. And to each his own, at what level you feel comfortable, when to start, how much. I don't think there is a single formula which works.
I heard something really interesting in a philanthropy workshop once, which said that, if you find it in you to say you do want to engage with the community in any manner, then think of 3 things. One is, what are you passionate about and what area do you want to work in? The second, how much time do you want to give it? And then the third, what are the resources you can spare for it? That gives you a lot more clarity about what area, when, and how much.
Yes, absolutely. Because a lot of the first-time givers do find themselves stuck in, what is more urgent than the other, what is more critical than the other, what can be solved faster than, so while there is an overall understanding that this is the long game and patience, but in the action of it, there is a lot of feeling stuck, because we all believe that we have finite resources and we have to put it in the right place to get the right result. And only after putting it in the wrong places and getting wrong results do you actually learn how to put it in the right places.
Make a couple of comments here, which is that there is so much to be done that, wherever whatever area you pick,
Yeah.
you can make a difference. That is one. And something else that I'm very proud about is that as a company, we don't just fund interventions. We actually, what she and her team ensures, that we roll up our sleeves and work at the grassroots. And I think that's important. Now, not everybody can or needs to do that, but I think, and I want to make sure I get the right sentiment across. Writing a check is great, but seeing it through, seeing that it's utilized in the right manner to get the outcomes, if not exactly what you were aiming for, but in that vicinity, I think that's important. And so going back to giving, I think to each his own, in terms of at what level you start, when you start, what is your what is your own sense of financial security, which says that I can, I mean, I can give back. But there is much more than that in terms of time and commitment, and a focus on getting outcomes.
You believe the same?
I do believe the same because I think, the more involved you are, the deeper you go into solving the problem. It's very easy to say, let's work at this program, let's give it some money, or, you know, let's outsource something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to have a deep impact, then I think you have to go the hard way of actually getting involved and trying to say, I'm in this, I'm going to watch this issue through. You don't want to work at the surface of things.
Yeah.
You actually want to work to say there's going to be a transformation. And one of the reasons, and we are one of the few corporates who actually have set up a separate team to actually work on the ground. I have more than 130 people working on the ground with these interventions. And that's not to say I don't believe in partnerships, but I know then I can control the narrative, I can monitor it, I can push it in the direction that I want to push it in.
Yeah.
And that in certain spaces is important to create that difference. And one of the stakeholders has to do that in the whole puzzle.
Someone has to be the glue.
So,
No, but thank you. I mean, I've been reading about, of course, like I said, your parents, and of course, both of you. And what kept coming back to me is I kept getting the feeling of, sense of participation. Like you participate in solving a problem. And that kept coming out in, whether it was Unnati or whether it was, you're listening about the foundation, about the way the corporation works. And listening to both of you has just confirmed how you think about it. Your values are showing in the work you do. If you had to describe what giving has done for you in one word, what would it look like?
Sense of satisfaction.
I think it keeps me grounded and gives me a sense of purpose.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your journey, and your mind space with us. And I hope a lot of people learn the good lessons that you have to give. So thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
Naghma. It's been
Pleasure
a
having
pleasure
this
chatting
conversation with you.